Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to day 3 of Real Estate Live. All this week, we're bringing together the real estate and property industry to talk about the future of that industry post-COVID-19. How can we work collaboratively to make things grow? How can we help to grow the economy? This morning, we have a really important session. It's very topical. We're talking about the future of our high streets. And as we start to open our high streets back to business, how is that going to work and what is that going to mean? We're going to have a great conversation this morning. We want to encourage all of you that are listening, and there are many of you watching this morning. We want to encourage you to take part in that conversation, and we also want to ask your opinion about the future of the real estate and property market. So we're going to start right at the beginning by asking you all to just take a few moments to answer our poll that we're running at every session. What is the most important factor in kickstarting the economy? And that is up on your screens now. So we just ask you to take, as you're logging in, a few minutes just to answer that poll. Also, just to let you know how you can talk to us this morning, let's make this as interactive as possible. Those of you that are new to Zoom, and I know many aren't, but just to run through the process, on your taskbar you have a Q&A button. That's where we'd like you this morning to put your questions to our panel, and we will either answer those on air in real time, or we may well type the answer to you. We also have a chat function. The chat function is really helpful for you to comment, to chat, and maybe share some thoughts and insights with both the panelists and the rest of the people watching. So please use the chat button to chat, use the Q&A button to ask questions, and you do also have the facility to put your hand up, and if appropriate, our chair will ask you to put your question live to the panel this morning. So to talk about, we've got a great, and to chair that panel, I'd like to ask Mark Faithfull this morning to introduce everybody. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine, and welcome everyone. Yeah, certainly I don't think we can have a more important and in many ways more emotive subject than the high street to talk about. In a moment, I'm going to ask each of the panel just to introduce themselves very briefly. Before that, I'd just like to sort of maybe perhaps say who I am and set the context of today, and also put an apology up in that if I'm not as good on the technology as I should be, then it's nothing personal, but I'll be trying to check all different buttons and questions as we go, and I'll try and make sure we get as much input from you guys as possible. And certainly towards the end, we'll try and go, purely into a Q&A. So keep your questions coming in, and we'll try and either run through them during the questions generally, or at the end of the Q&A. And as I say, apologies if I get any of the tech wrong as we go. So just to introduce myself very briefly, my name's Mark Faithfull, and I'm a long-standing retail and retail real estate journalist. And so, as you can imagine, the high street has been one of the major subjects that I've been covering for, well over 20 years now, quite scarily. And I just want to say a couple of things about it before I ask the guys to say who they are. I think, one of the things is, as I said, it's a very, very emotive topic. I think whenever you talk about any kind of retail subjects, people get much more worked up about the high street than they do about shopping centres or retail parks or any other kind of destination. So I think it's very personal. But I think there's also a lot of mythology about the high street. People tend to think of the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, cricket on the green. A lot of those high streets haven't existed for 50, 70 years. A lot of them never existed. So, people get very misty-eyed about something, that perhaps are slightly over nostalgic about. By the same token, obviously the high street has been terribly challenged. I mean, COVID is obviously the latest and, a huge thing to come along. Online tends to get blamed for everything, but, that's a much more complicated subject. We've also got things like business rates, we've got the lack of free parking, we've got rents, we've got planning, we've got the fact that most high streets are very fractured, so they're owned by, maybe 100 landlords, each thinking about themselves rather than about the good of the general high street. We've got austerity, we've got just the way that people consume. Although online is blamed a lot of those small independent grocers closed down because people used to drive past the high street to go to a big Tesco, and that happened 20 years ago, not in the last 10 years. And just a whole swathe of issues, pretty much all of which have challenged the role of the high street. So we're going to perhaps try and set out some of the thoughts about how it might move forward as we come out of the pandemic, hopefully, and kind of talk about some of the issues around that and about what we can do positively to try and re-energise high streets around the UK. So without further ado, Jackie, can I ask you to just introduce yourself very briefly?
Yep, my name is Jackie Mulligan, and it was the emotional connection with the high street, Mark, that you mentioned there that provoked me to take the leap, and I founded ShopAppy.com which is a digital platform seeking to level the playing field between small shops, local businesses and the online giants.
Thank you, Jackie. And Faye.
Hi, I'm Faye Cannings. I'm the founder of a company called Seeked. It's an online platform, and now I've taken it into the physical space as well to create pop-ups, focusing on jewellery and accessory designers with an ethical focus. So designers that are very conscious about the way they make and the supply chains they work with. And it's a sort of multi-brand offer that, as I say, is online and offline. I also have a background in property and regeneration, so I've seen firsthand, the impact that developers can have in terms of enhancing high streets and the sort of knock-on impacts around that. So, and for me, the key driver is all about community and how we bring these communities together.
Thank you. Ed, if you'd introduce yourself, and it might be worth saying who you were as well as who you are.
That's a very philosophical question, Mark. I'm glad you didn't ask me who I think I'm going to be.
Oh, yeah, that's later.
That's even harder one to answer. So I am the Global Growth Director at Toolbox Group. Toolbox Group is an organisation with two distinct functions. We are a marketing consultancy with 20 years working in retail real estate and placemaking. And we also have our own proprietary software called Malcolm, which is operations management application, again, principally working in retail real estate, but broadening our horizons into other kinds of asset classes. Outside of that, I am also on the board of two small local producers, one brewery and one ice cream company. So beer and ice cream, that's pretty much all you need in life. We are also, fingers crossed, about to become a bar operator. So I've got a bit of experience both selling into retail businesses, supermarkets and restaurants, and also soon to be our own operator. I used to run an organisation called Revo. I ran it for 4 years. I was there for 11. And Revo is an advocate for organisations, businesses, individuals working in the retail property and placemaking sector, exists to help them thrive and prosper through advocacy, research, and bringing people together. Well, it used to be through events, but obviously no longer.
Thanks, Ed. Mary.
Hello, good morning, welcome. I'm Mary Wallace. My job title at IBM is Retail and Consumer Behaviour SME, which is a mouthful, but it means that I look at what's happening or not happening with consumers and customers, and then I try and help clients, all sorts of clients, not just retailers. I help them understand what it is they need to do to respond to plan for, and serve those customer and consumer needs in the right way. I also lead IBM's High Streets and Place agenda. And outside of IBM, I'm the creator and co-presenter of the fantastic Homeground podcast, which is about the people, spaces and places that make our towns and communities worth living in. So this is literally right up my street.
Excellent. And finally, Sherry.
Hi, thank you for letting me join. I'm a partner at Future City, and we are a global placemaking agency and public art commissioning agency. Been around for over 12 years, founded by Mark Davey. And our clients include developers, cities, business improvement districts. And we're really thinking about how to bring a vision to a place and a clear identity, not just a branding, but really what is the essence of a place. And then we're constantly looking for what the cultural intersection is, whether it's bringing in a cultural organization, whether it's thinking about programming that happens across a place, whether it's the intersection between retail or craft and how the experience of the place is created and what that public realm means. On a personal level, I've worked across every art form except feature film, and across 4 continents. So we're constantly trying to think about the context of place and what's happened before, but also how to bring in the insight of what's happening around the world and understanding how that relates to our global communities. People are not all from one place anymore. And so how can we think about bringing countries of origin also back into the sense of the high street, because that's our contemporary Britain.
Thank you, Sherry. And in fact, with this being the summer of drive-in movies, you might get an opportunity to bring feature films into your experience as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's the way that I complete the picture there.
Before I ask the questions, one interesting thing is I'm just having a quick look at the poll on my right, and You know, I think if we want to look about the complexity of the high street, what is interesting is that there's not really one particular area that anyone thinks stands out. There's about 3 or 4 that are running very evenly, you know, which are, you know, it's clearly not a black and white issue. Got quite a long and quite a big question to start with for Jackie, and then I'll ask this of everyone if that's okay, which is, what have you been working on to support retail on the high street during COVID-19? And what have you learned? What strengths and trends have you seen? So there you go. Off you go.
ShopAppy obviously was a platform that existed before COVID. It started 3.5 years ago with the aim of bringing shops and services together in one place, because our belief was if you make it easier for people to support local, they will. And we created evening click and collect points and just allow people to browse and feel more engaged with their own local places. When COVID-19 struck, we looked back at our vision. Our vision was to create better places to live and work. Our heart is in small businesses, and what we didn't want to wake up to after COVID was a world of warehouses, trillionaires, superstores, and our small businesses on their knees. So immediately we offered a free offer to all any business to join ShopAppy. In fact, on the day or two before lockdown, and we introduced local delivery. We went from 29 towns to 103 towns launching ShopAppy in 3 weeks. And we have had huge numbers of businesses join us. But more importantly, we've seen tens of thousands of pounds go into local businesses through the crisis. The best way to recover economically is to enable people to trade safely through the crisis and do everything you can to do it. The fact is, yesterday when schools opened, or 2 days ago when schools opened, 40 to 60% of parents sent their kids to school. That is the risk factor people feel. So we have to actually plan for that. We may open restrictions, people still might feel fear. So unless our high streets are more digitally resilient, we are going to be worse off. So what we want to do and what we set out to do through COVID was, let's get a support local habit, not an Amazon habit, a support local habit coming through. And so we'll give you the online convenience. You can book things, you can browse, you can buy. We'll make it free for businesses. And we got supported by Visa too. So it's been a very interesting time. We've had a very emotional calls with businesses, absolutely terrified, shocked all the way through. We've been with them all the way through this crisis, and we've learned so much on their journey. But what we've been inspired by, what the strength is that small businesses are agile. They can change. We've seen them change, and they can adapt. But they do need now. I mean, if not now, when are you going to go online? This has got to be the reason to do it.
Thank you, Jackie. Well, Faye, Jackie set the bar quite high with what she's been up to. How about you?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. And yeah, really aspirational, and you know, can absolutely see the links in you know, kind of communities coming together and seeing how we can work together to strengthen offers. And I think one of the things that's really stood out with the small businesses I've been working with is just how innovative they've been, how they've been able to pivot and be creative about new ways of reaching customers online and, you know, through various different tools. I think one of the key things I've been doing is sort of using this time to really kind of connect even further with my community of designers. So I work with, you know, 50 to 100 designer makers, as I said before, mainly around jewellery and accessories. And it's been so encouraging sort of seeing just, you know, how buoyant they've sort of kept themselves during this time. What I've done personally is created a series of webinars and different interactive sessions for the community. And that served to kind of galvanise the community further, to sort of create more of a peer-to-peer network, but also obviously kind of create interesting content and interesting experiences online for our audiences. Yeah, it's been brilliant getting people's stories out there, and I think that's something key that has been on people's minds for quite a while. You know, the stories behind brands, what makes them unique. I think, you know, pre-COVID, you know, we'd absolutely seen customers sort of being more interested in how and where things are made. And I think with obviously people kind of having more time to sort of research and look into things, and given the situation, that's become front and centre. There's more interest factor in those smaller brands, and you know, the kind of the provenance and the uniqueness about them. And I think that's absolutely something that hopefully will carry on forward. I think, yeah, there's hopefully numerous opportunities sort of taking the online through to the physical going forward. Certainly one of the areas I'd been very hands-on was around sort of creating pop-up shops. absolutely seen the growth of those kind of experiences, and how, you know, they are sort of working very well to kind of activate and animate new spaces in shopping centres and the high street. And I think hopefully there'll be lots of opportunities for brands to get out there and, you know, try new experiences, take advantage of, you know, the types of physical spaces which should be available. And from a personal perspective, I think the sort of multi-brand curated approach is very powerful. It enables people to come together and create experiences, and perhaps access opportunities that they wouldn't necessarily be able to independently. So I think there's a whole raft of opportunities around that, and how we can work with landlords and different occupiers to make the most of those opportunities. So I think it's been about listening, and how we can now sort of mobilize all the good activity and put that, you know, back into the physical environment.
Thanks, Faye. Over to you, Ed.
Cheers, Mark. Some really interesting examples of how those guys are supporting businesses and places over this challenging time. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got two fairly distinct bits of the business: the marketing consultancy bit and the software bit. So on the marketing side of our business, we've focused quite a lot of our attention on communications, digital campaigns, to engage with our clients and customers, to ensure that we're top of their mind and a source of information, whether it's COVID-related information about those stores that did remain open, those essential stores that did remain open in places, and how they're accessible. But also, importantly, I think some more light-hearted but positive messages about acts of either kindness or bravery or giving in this difficult time. And we can, I'm sure, talk later on about some of the trends that we have seen in the way that people have behaved, with their fellow human beings over the last few weeks, which I think has been encouraging, and hopefully will continue long into the future. So we have been working with members of the community on celebrating that. We also ran a campaign over Mental Health Awareness Week, where we sent out, I think it was 3,000 postcards from friends, colleagues, or family members to vulnerable people, just to say hello, to make sure that they, were reminded that people were there for them, to support them in what is clearly emotionally a challenging time for lots of people. And then we're running competitions at the moment to encourage customers to, again, remember that retail will open soon, and when it opens, we are encouraging them to get back into our towns and cities and to shop and to enjoy themselves. One of the campaigns that we also are working on at the moment with a chap called Martin Blackwell is something called Monster Hero Safari, which is a bit of fun, but it's a high street experience where families are given information and tasked with hunting down 10 analog monster heroes, analog being vinyls in shop windows. Each of those has got an NFC or a QR tag displayed, which then takes you to a donation page where you can donate a small amount of money to NHS Charities Together from £4. And if the kids find their 10 monster heroes, then they get an ebook at the end of it. And we hope that will bring people into towns and cities when they reopen. As it happens, my colleagues at Toolbox Group did also work with their client in Belgium to open a shopping centre, which is pretty unusual in the last couple of months, but can be one of only a few in the world that has opened in the last 2 months. And actually signals from that opening are relatively positive within the constraints within which we are clearly operating. And we're getting about 12,000 people through that scheme every week, and one retailer is reporting only a 4% drop in like-for-like sales. So things are not all bad, and as I mentioned earlier, we might even be opening a bar, on the other side of the businesses that I'm involved in. So activity does continue even if things have changed. On the software side of our business, we partnered with British Bids and launched a version of our operations management software that included access to lots of COVID-19 information, mal news, information surveys, operational security infrastructure, just to enable those clients to be able to communicate with occupiers and consumers on the ground, both as we closed and now as we reopen. So there's obviously lots going on across the business. In terms of strengths and trends, as I mentioned, I think certainly one of the things that I have noticed that is encouraging is the way that people are treating one another. And I think that we're all witness to acts of kindness and generosity that perhaps had been missing, especially with the fairly vitriolic last few years of political campaigning and discourse around various different macro political issues. So long may that continue. Of course, I think Captain Sir Tom Moore was probably the absolute epitome of that kind of behaviour, and really did give us all an encouraging sense that we will get through this difficult situation together, and acts of kindness and empathy will be what will enable us to do so. So clearly innovation has been mentioned already, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again soon.
Thanks, Ed. Mary, same question for you.
Well, at IBM, we've been working just flat out with clients to keep businesses going, to change businesses so that they can serve customers differently, do the right things. I specifically have been working with our UK retail team to help understand that micro and macro of the road that we're now on, what the now, sooner and later is, without descending into tedious navel-gazing strategy territory, and actually coming up with real practical ideas that are going to work. Like, how do you now serve a range of different customer journeys for a much more varied consumer profile, which could be anything from how do you set up new services in a physical floor space of your business with all new constraints? How do you understand whether customers got special status, like someone who's shielding, or have they got an NHS blue light card, so you can take them to the front of the queue and serve them differently? And there's just loads of things that have changed the what, the who, when, and how we serve now. And then the mirror image of that scenario within retail is, how do I protect my staff? How do I set up new working patterns, distribution methods, supply chains? And then also zooming out from that, I'm looking at, where are some of those shifts that you've all talked about? Where might they take us? For instance, is there a potential new commercial model that blends state intervention or controls with market structures? And as we saw in Feed the Nation, what's going to happen to the whole cities strategy that loads of retailers have bet the house on? And now here this morning, there's a new Rightmove survey, I think, that says people who have money with houses are all rushing to buy in a market town or near the countryside, because, we've been told to focus on urban customers. And actually, to echo what we're all saying, is whether this rekindled love that we're seeing for the high street is actually going to translate into a real longer term change in that retail ecosystem. Whether the combination of people wanting to grow their own food, be less wasteful, shop more with independents and directly with producers and the high street, does that mean there's now actually real sustained competition for supermarkets and big retailers? And the other football that I want to stamp on is, let's stop talking about new normal, because people are saying, actually, I don't want new normal. I want different. I want better. I've seen something different, and actually, can we move that way rather than try and reheat souffle? People's priorities have changed now. People have also got new social status. Hang on, I've got a cat who wants to join in, so I'm just going to let her join in. We have to be careful because we're seeing new social status. The people who made sourdough and did yoga with Adrienne, and then there's also people who've got immunity who had to go and get a job at Tesco to stack shelves, right? We are seeing that. New relationships with product as well. We're seeing that. Is delivery now over product? I don't know. And actually for retailers also, it means a new operational rhythm. We are now going into a second wave. Sorry to rain on your parade, but we are. So we're looking at ease down, lockdown patterns. Now, a bigger retailer might be able to deal with that, but what does that mean for high street retailers? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're looking at that might be a maybe. So we need to figure out what are the combination of things coming together. It's not one thing, it's a combination. And how are they sort of moving forward into the next phase? So I've been a bit busy, Mark. Thanks for asking.
That's all right. No, I'm starting to think the fact that I can make killer cocktails on Zoom classes doesn't sound as impressive as it did when we were chatting beforehand. So, Sherry, lastly to you.
Yeah. I think a lot of picking up on what Mary's saying, which is by looking at the trends we're asked in our strategy work to really project forward. So we've been thinking a lot about, this concept of future proofing. And rather than, taking the concerns that people have, like security, safety, when you talk about changing the sort of traffic pattern through shops, et cetera, how do you turn these into universal questions and ways that you can think about them as exciting and interesting? How do you take advantage that the rule book is being kind of shredded and reposition it? So, for example, thinking about scalability, how is it, particularly in the public space that joins a lot of these shops, how do you think about the design of it so that it can feel full when there are fewer people, so it can suggest a sort of way of moving through the space that's pleasurable, and how you can look at altering that? It might be because it's due to security, it might be because it's COVID crisis, it might just be because of the weather and there are fewer people there during that time. But how do you think about building in the flexibility so that you can have different scale of experience? And how do you think about scalability in the actual places that are being built or designed with the shops? How can it facilitate a larger shop or a smaller one? One of the things that's been really amazing to watch is how a lot of shops have come to being able to serve out of the front. How they've been able to become flexible and then change what products they're giving and deal with it more like a kiosk transaction. And some of that leads us to, well, what could that be like in a permanent structure? How do you think about when you're designing for retail that there'll be certain smaller places? Maybe they're not quite as flexible as pop-ups. Maybe they don't change as often. They're a little more permanent, but they allow these smaller businesses to exist. And they also mean that you can keep that constancy if things like a second wave of COVID or anything else that we can't predict is going to come up. But it's something that you go to because you like the experience, not because it's a poor substitute for something else. But how do you think about building these new types of experience which give an interest and a fascination to it? It's really, really important that you're thinking about your digital and your virtual presence as well as your physical presence, as Jackie was talking about, and how you build that in. How do you think about what your virtual presence is as well as that in-person experience, and build those up positively over time so that you can flex between them and they can actually have a dialogue with each other? How do you think about that relationship? When it comes to the programming of spaces and how do we encourage people back in? For example, we're working with the Heart of London Business Alliance, and they're very interested in how, London and Partners is also talking about how culture is going to help welcome people back into the place. How do you have a kind of experience which brings you back in, gives you a reason to go out as opposed to just buying online? At the same time, the big challenge is that the creative industries and the cultural sector are also the ones that's been hardest hit as far as just removing the possibilities. So we are also thinking how we can work with cultural organizations to flex different offers, particularly for performing arts where their theaters are under tremendous threat and whether people can gather. And then, as a couple of people have mentioned, there's a possibility that some of the London experience is going to move out of London. And how do we think about this in a really opportunistic fashion? How is it that market towns actually now might have a really better offer for great cultural organizations to possibly be home there? How do we think about that kind of offer going and expanding and actually being distributed across the country a little more evenly? There's a nice, exciting offer that's happening there. And then the other issue is, now that we've been forced to really live locally, we're starting to engage locally. So the sense of like what a community center is, what a community gathering place, what a library is becoming far more important to people. And the ambition of what you do for it and the diversity of the community that you serve, there's a great opportunity now for developers, for town center managers to really think about those assets and redefine who's using them and what can happen there. So yes, a lot of our questions have been taking what you guys have been doing and then trying to think how we can build that into the future structure.
I think we've slightly touched on it with a couple of the comments, but one of the questions I'd like to ask, and we've got quite a bit to get through, so if I can ask everyone to be fairly concise, because they're all huge questions, really. As I said right at the beginning, there is quite a lot of mythology about the high street as well. You know, people tend to look with it through rose-tinted glasses. You know, given that perhaps we've got more of a chance at the moment to kind of rewrite the rules, what kind of high streets do we actually want? I mean, what do we really want from a high street rather than, as I say, just replicating or trying to save what was there already? So perhaps if I could start with you again, Jackie. I mean, what do we want out of our high streets going forwards?
Well, I think what we were doing was thinking very linearly about the future.
Yeah.
And we were thinking, well, the only option for the high street is to be experiential. And of course, when you get a COVID outbreak or pandemic or anything, that starts to challenge that. Actually, then people are looking at, I need a shop. I need somewhere I can go. So for me, the future of the high street has to be a mixed economy. And the pendulum was overswinging, definitely, in most places. So we need that mix. We need the small and the large, and we need a service sector, but also we need more opportunities for social enterprise. We need more of inclusivity. Things, you know, it was gentrification was happening, which excludes people. You know, you can talk about arts and culture, but we want it to be inclusive and representative, and we want to have different price points. We don't want to say artisan and then have to pay £3.50 for a donut. We need a whole mix. So for me, it's about, being an inclusive environment, being accessible to towns. I don't believe that there is a nostalgia. I think people, it's in our culture about shops and local businesses. People dream about opening a coffee shop or a bookshop. It's something quite deep-rooted. And actually, I think we were denying and undervaluing those experiences. And that's something we try to address. And I think shaping an alternative future is exactly what we should be doing right now. And it isn't about future-proofing. It's about future-readying. Be future-ready. Stop trying to proof ourselves against it. I want to ban future-proofing as a word now, because I don't want to hear it for the next decade. I'm so sick of hearing it. Because what we proved is we can't future-proof. Something can hit the high street and completely change the paradigm. What we would do is just going in a line, and we need to change that.
Mary, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, totally agree with that. Because also that future wasn't worth having anyway. It was a future that served a very few people pretty well, but not a lot of people. And to come to your point, Mark, about the myths, one of the myths is that the high streets need, and to yours, Jackie, basically posh, expensive things that have the word artisan in them, and then hike the price up 5 times. And there's a big myth that you need affluent consumers, to make those things work. Well, why do we need affluent consumers? Can't the high streets be for normal people? That underinvestment has come from our messed up perceptions of what and who is valuable. Those people working in shops and the NHS and taxi drivers and transport workers, last year they weren't valuable, as we saw. But lo and behold, oh look, overnight it's changed. Look what's just happened. Let's clap for NHS and key workers who have literally just saved our lives. So the question is, are we now going to invest in them and the places and the high streets where those people live, work and shop? And I just want to raise the flag as well for the reports that are coming out this week that the BAME population is massively disproportionately represented in the number of COVID cases, and they make up a lot of our key workers and frontline workers and the people who own those local businesses. So we absolutely need to take this point now to make something, as I said before, not new normal, but different, better, and to echo your point, Jackie, more inclusive. And I'd actually say as well, obviously look at this panel here, we are not those voices. So in the Q&A, if you are on this call, please do jump in and put your point forward.
Thank you, Mary. Ed, obviously you work with a lot of companies that were looking sort of strategically at town centres. Any thoughts from you about, kind of trying to strategise a better future for the high street?
Well, I don't want to agree with everything Jackie and Mary have said, so I'm going to agree and then try and find a way not to halfway through how I respond. But there is a risk, I think, in some of the narrative that we have seen in the press, in the property and the retail press in particular, people talking about bringing forward a future that may have happened in 2030 to 2020, a decade happening in a few weeks, which would assume that actually we were on the right path for reinventing high streets and town centres. We just have to do it a little bit quicker. And therefore, the solutions to lots of the problems that we were seeing on the high street are the same, but they're just being introduced at greater speed. I agree entirely that we need to be looking at this much more through the prism of consumers. So where I don't agree with Mary and Jackie necessarily is a problem with an artisan bakery. I have no problem with it at all. I have no problem with it if I'm a purchaser of a donut for £3.50 or coffee for £5. What I do think is not right is if you only have that choice. You don't have a choice to shop in a different way if you are a different consumer, or if you have different needs and wants. And that plays to the point about accessibility and inclusion and who makes decisions. So who is involved in the conversation about the future of our towns and cities? Is it people like us, with all due respect to the other panelists, or is it a much wider group of individuals that are much more representative? At the moment, the fear is that it's people like us. So the challenge is therefore to all of us, how do we get more voices and more diversity across all sorts of different measurements, whether it's ethnicity or sexuality or disability or gender, age, into the conversation, so that we do create towns and cities that are future-proofed. You might not like the word, and whoever it was, Jeff Bezos says, you're better off trying to work out what's the same in the next 20 years rather than what's going to change, because then you can set a business or an organizational strategy around it. But we are talking about trying to create places where they are resilient. So we need to build more resilience into place, and in doing so, we do need to look to the future, maybe not too far into the future, and we do need to respect the views of more people, and we're not doing that at the moment.
Sherry, if I can pull in, I think we were going to talk about the role of arts and culture, so perhaps this might be quite a good opportunity to do that. And also, there was we've got a lot of questions actually, but one of them was around the idea of whether, for high streets, it's about trying to bring that arts and culture into a consolidated space that kind of drives footfall and gives people a destination to go rather than it being scattered around the town.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to remember is that you don't necessarily have to bring arts and culture in. Arts and culture exist everywhere. Creative expression is a part of our lives at every socioeconomic level. So, I don't want people to think that arts and culture only equates to a gentrification or a high price tag. People are involved in artistic expression everywhere. So one of the important things is, that we always do is we always take a look at what's in the place, what's immediately around the place, what's that larger ecosystem, and how do you actually encourage, give more visibility and support to where it already exists there. The other thing is you can't just assume what people want. You need to have that diversity of offer, from who it is who's performing or what kind of medium it is that's there. And don't make assumptions. The right kind of work that is speaking to the right place or the right scale. You might need a dance company that is pulling from training young people. You might want something that is an exchange between that and an international organization that comes in to work with them. So I just don't want us to think that art always equals something that is being piloted in or projected in. It can be actually bringing the visibility to what exists there, the richness to it, and feeding into that. And artisan isn't always a high price tag. There are very well crafted works and affordable artworks, etc., that are out there that are a lot cheaper than terrible reproductions. So don't assume that just because something is made from someone nearby or is done with care means that it necessarily is pretentious or expensive. Craft fairs, for example, that's artisan. And a lot of that is how you have affordable price points. And one of the things that we've worked with, and I've done personally in my past a lot, is how you have affordable art that's available immediately and actually conversation with artists who have created it. You can look for these opportunities. So I think it's important that it's a time where we should not jump to conclusions or about what something means. We should really think about how we enrich, the offer that we have and who can do it. What we really try and do is think about where our best work is when we're a matchmaker. We try and understand the place, the people, the tensions, what is going to be a constraint now and in the future, and how do we bring somebody who would naturally want to be there but hadn't thought about it? Or how do you give more visibility to something that's been great but just wasn't framed correctly? So I don't want people to think that arts and culture is to replace something. A lot of times it's what gels it together. And it also is done at many different price points.
Okay, thanks, Sherry. What I'm going to do, because we've got absolutely tons of questions coming in, Faye and Jackie both want to jump in on this, so I'm going to invite them to do that, and then we might start going through the questions, and I'll probably direct them to individuals, and we'll see whether we can get through all of them in the time we've got available to us. But before we do that, Faye, you wanted to say something, and then I'll come to you, Jackie.
Yeah, I was just picking up on the points about sort of diversity, really. Absolutely agree. It is about sort of real sort of balance and neglecting nicks in high streets. Obviously being very sympathetic to the area and what will work for that, particular sort of customer base and surroundings. But I think this is where sort of the role of, like you were saying, Sherry, almost like the curators, the brokers come in, where there are those sort of curated communities where we can really sort of reach out to different types of customers, different brands and different businesses that are very diverse from different backgrounds, walks of life, fascinating stories and different types of products, and try and bring them in this sort of, much more inclusive approach. So I think, there's a lot of opportunity there to kind of reach out into our communities of different businesses and brands and sort of, be that sort of curator to allow more access and almost democratization of these opportunities to these sort of smaller brands that may not necessarily always know how to access the opportunity. I think touching on a previous point as well about the sort of the different types of lets. One thing, as I mentioned, I've seen work really well is the nature of pop-ups. And I think, again, it's about finding a blend of, how can we allow brands and customers to almost sort of trial different types of experiences and offers. So landlords get the benefit of, new offers, products coming in, seeing what works, and equally for brands, it is a way of sort of, letting the market almost decide whether or not there's a fit for that particular product or service. Going forward, hopefully we'll start to see more different types of opportunities coming forward. And I'd like to see also landlords working collaboratively and flexibly to sort of support some of these brands access the opportunities as well. And equally, councils, is there a role there to play with local authorities and how they start to look at different ways of repurposing their commercial assets as well.
Thanks, Faye. And Jackie, just finish off.
Yeah, so I'm a fan of artisan bakeries, just to clear that up. I do like my sourdough as much as anybody else. But what I was trying to explain there is the relevancy. It's relevancy to the local community, I think, is the most important thing. And so that when we're putting things in place, we don't exclude other people by doing that. So we just that inclusivity point. But on the arts and culture side, that's another thing that we've been really keen to support, because in all the focus of COVID, everybody's looking at the corner shop, the essentials, the convenience, and there are loads of solutions out there that are bringing groceries to your door, but it's kind of reducing place into just a place where you get essentials when there is all this amazing arts and culture activity. So one of the things we were keen on doing was, how do we support the artists through this as well? Because they rely on these trades. So one of the first things we've done is in Saltaire, there's the first virtual makers fair. So we have artisans, artists and makers and producers creating beautiful artworks that are in amongst the shops, because this year we don't have our makers fair. 65 artists have joined the trail, and immediately it's reminding us when we're in lockdown and in the kind of fear that there is, our places are places of beauty and talent and creativity. So just on the ShopAppy side, although we've always promoted something which is about, it's shopping in its widest form, it's how do we get people spending locally to support a whole realm of activities. So I just wanted to clear that.
No, that's
okay. Go back to my £3.50 donut now.
So I think we've established that we're all standing up for the beleaguered £3.50 donut. Okay, so I think that's an important thing to establish at this point. We've got loads and loads of questions. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to attempt to try and get through as many as we possibly can. And I'm just going to direct them to individuals. If you feel really strongly about it, if I could just ask the panel to hold their hands up, as they have been very politely so far, and I'll pull you in. And if we can be quite brief as well, and we'll see how many we can rattle through in the quarter of an hour that we've got left. One question I think is interesting, and maybe I'll start with you, Mary, on this one, is about the grocery corner store or corner shops. I mean, they've been, they were the sort of frontline heroes at the very beginning of COVID in particular. They're also quite often owned by people from, very diverse backgrounds in terms of ethnicity and culture. How do we protect them going forwards? And that's for Mary.
When you say protect, what do you mean?
Well, how do we help? Because you know, perhaps when they were doing successfully at the beginning, that's because people didn't want to travel or couldn't travel, and also because all the other shops were closed down, and maybe, you know, people were a bit uncomfortable about going to big supermarkets right at the beginning. Obviously, that we're going to go back into a period where, you know, all the normal challenges are there. Are there things we can do to help those corner shops carry on thriving?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's firstly bringing them together so that they're not on their own, and giving them access to any, I mean, this is with, obviously from IBM, any technology and data that they need, that they can build on that momentum, because they've shown that they're really great at serving the population, and often that was in conjunction with local transport companies, taxi drivers, and other businesses in the area. So they showed themselves how it could be done. And what we need to do now as people in businesses that can help them is to work together with them, and not just go, thanks very much for your help, see you, bye, we're now off to support Tesco again. So it's about more of a different way of thinking and working and decision making, as opposed to one specific thing. And that requires, I guess, a bit of bravery on the part of traditional businesses. You know, different thinking. As I said, certainly like businesses like IBM, that's what I'm encouraging. So I guess, again, to the audience is, how do we get out of the rut that we were in, and do something that's genuinely different, and, you know, that we can measure as well, because there's so many examples of individual places or businesses doing brilliant things. The challenge now is, how do you scale that? How do you keep that going? How do you make that sustainable?
Okay, thank you. Faye, this one's going to be for you, and I'm just reading them in the order that they come through in terms of thumbs up. I think there were questions about, well, there's suggestions that, you know, independents were being quite resilient compared with chains on the high street. How do the small retailers, or what can be done to help the small retailers get people back out to the high street?
Sure. As you say, I mean, small retailers and a lot of these sort of independent brands are really stepping up and, you know, looking at innovative ways to really make the most out of their brands online and offline anyway. I think there's been a sort of a whole swathe of different campaigns and different types of opportunities to tap into to help brands, you know, look more at their sort of social media, digital media strategies. I think, yeah, in terms of if we're looking at brands almost translating into the physical environment, then I think it goes back to some of the points I made earlier about how do we bridge that gap? How do we try and sort of match or provide opportunities for these smaller brands to access new locations, whether that's empty units, whether it's new spaces in the public realm, markets, a whole swathe of opportunities. So it's, yeah, I suppose it's looking at how can, as a collective, as a collaborative approach, how can we work, how can, you know, individual stakeholders like property developers, landlords, councils, you know, what are their sort of strategies in terms of reaching out to these types of small businesses to try and offer those sort of opportunities, and equally are there ways in which, you know, like we've talked about as a collective model, we can kind of club together and then almost be, you know, the sum of, you know, more of a sum of each other's parts. So I think, yeah, so that combined approach and collective approach to how we can work together and join up on different types of campaigns and different types of marketing, I think could be really beneficial.
Thank you. You answered two of our questions there, Faye, so that was very good. Ed, I apologise in advance for asking you this question, and it's a big one. So again, if I can ask for a necessarily brief answer, but you know, leases, and I know you're hugely involved with business rates as well. What you know is practical for landlords and retailers to do together? Because at the end of the day, they both need to survive. And, you know, as we know from our many conversations, and just for the audience, you know, one of the big problems with high streets is the shopping centres can make strategic decisions because they're owned by one company who can decide what's good for the whole shopping centre. You know, whether they get it right or wrong is another question, but, you know, they can make a decision. High streets tend to be owned by 100 different landlords, all with different agendas. So it's very difficult to bring people together to think collectively. But, you know, are there obvious high headline things that can be done around leases and rents and business rates?
I mean, I think that's probably three impossible questions. But,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Let me try and answer them. So, So, the reality of the retail market in terms of rents is that in real terms, in the last 10 years, there has been little, if not any, growth in rents. Most of the growth in occupancy costs has come from business rates.
Yeah.
Some utility costs, and obviously then on the operational side, things like labour costs. So in that sense, and also lease lengths have shortened. So I'm not here as a defender of all landlords, because there's a massive range across the country. But the reality is the market has, if it's taken us some time, has adapted to that. And I think we will see much more adaptation as a result of what has happened in the last couple of months happening quicker. So turnover rents and these kinds of things, the deal that I talked about earlier on is on a turnover only basis. So there will be lots more examples of that in the future, not just because it helps retailers cash flow, but also it draws landlords and retailers into a partnership where they have to share information, and therefore they have to have a conversation about what's going right and what's going wrong, and that's got to be better. So to then take that on to your next question about kind of disparate ownership within towns and cities, it's the same point, and Faye was just talking about it. There has to be, in my mind, a massive kind of campaign around creating even more central coordinated groups that can run initiatives like having incubator strategies for town centres, where they go out to universities, they go out to the market, they go to online and find businesses that may also benefit from having physical space as well as digital space, or as well as a space that they've got at the university or in a creative industry. So there has to be, bids are a great example of how that can work, but I think there needs to be much more of it, and there needs to be much more emphasis on it as we come out of it. Last thing to say just quickly, the whole model of lease and rent has always been based on shops as a kind of distribution centre for goods and fulfilment of goods. Increasingly, shops are part of a kind of customer acquisition strategy. They are the manifestation of a brand if you get it right, not just the logo on the store, but the service that you offer, the product that you offer, the relationship that you have with your customers. And because rents are coming down, whereas advertising across digital media is going up and will continue to go up, then actually the cost of customer acquisition within a shop is becoming increasingly competitive and economical. So it's a different way of using stores, which was happening before, but I think will happen even more in the future.
Brilliant, thanks, Ed. Jackie, I'm going to ask you two questions in one, if I may. One is this question just about how you see perhaps the change in the 5-day week, or where people work across a 5-day week, how that will impact local high streets, and perhaps also about embracing practical digital technology as well, things that smaller independent owners can actually do.
So I'll take the last one first. So the embracing, what Faye was talking there about collaboration of small businesses, that's exactly why ShopAppy was set up. Costs of creating your own website and then marketing it effectively are often prohibitive for small businesses, initially at least. So joining something like ShopAppy, which allows people to collaborate in one place, is going to work, and aggregators work. It's why people go on Amazon, Just Eat, Compare.com, all of these, because it makes it easy for the customers. The problem is that our local shops, however local they are still quite inconvenient when we are working, getting on a ring road, or when we're in a situation of lockdown where we'd have to physically go out, we might not feel comfortable to do so. So bring it all together, make it easy. If you make it easier for people to support local businesses, they will, and that's that. But in terms of the change of the 5-day week, and it goes to Mary's earlier point about city-centric city-centric living. We've had I remember seeing towns I absolutely love in Yorkshire being described as travel to work areas. And I felt really insulted by that. So I thought, hang on a minute, these communities have hearts. These have communities who want local shops and services. So what I see with the 5-day week and changing working models is more of a disaggregated model of retail and businesses. So the smaller towns, secondary towns, travel to work areas, parades, etc., fulfilling a more interesting function. And I love Ed's points around incubation, and we've seen great work by the National Market Traders Federation and NABMA around youth markets and bringing in these experiences. So my view with the 5-day week changing, and maybe more of us working from home, etc., is it will probably start to level again the opportunities to engage with your cafes, your restaurants, your pop-up experiences. It might recognise the role of secondary towns and us not being demoted into travel to work areas. And I think for cities, it will be about reinvention and maybe creating more cultural offers, etc. And city centre living, I think, will happen, but I do think there is a migration towards market towns. And it was because of the linear thinking. It was too linear towards one particular narrative, and constantly denying the importance of local communities and smaller towns. So I'd say it's a positive thing for market towns, secondary towns, suburbs, boroughs. I grew up in a suburb and always felt like, God, I wish I lived in a place, you know? I wish I lived in a place. I wish I didn't have to always commute to a place. So we want more places. We want people to feel they belong to more places and create more vibrant places to live and work. That was the heart of our strategy. As far as I'm concerned, it should be what we were all working towards.
And Sherry, presumably you feel that, you know, the role of arts and culture and planning around places to live is going to be very key for these high streets, particularly if we do change the way that we live and work somewhat from what's happened.
Yeah, one of the great advantages, as Jackie is saying, is that now that, you know, people are coming in and out of their homes and at different times and different days of the week, it means that there is a chance and also, you know, a sort of need to keep that vibrancy all the time. I mean, I've lived in English villages, I've lived in towns, and I've lived in cities. And one of the things that I always find is that the original village model is incredibly sustainable. You know, people from all backgrounds who live in all houses come together for the same services in the same shops. And I watched that there was much more sort of integration of the community based on that. It also was that local was produced and local was sold there. And, you know, there are a lot of things, I'm going to say as an American, there are a lot of things that the British really, really know and got right. And they need to also go back and like recognize them. There are some beautiful elements to village life that has all of that enrichedness. Even though it is in a city, it still forms on its scale really well. And so again, you know, how the arts are there. I noticed one of the questions said, you know, can you think about spaces that are not just ground floor? Yeah, you can think about the next story. You can think about the first story, the second story. Any spaces that aren't being used, there are many people who need spaces to be able to create. And there are a lot of people who would welcome, you know, the diversity of the kinds of spaces so that you can really round out, you know, what's on offer. So, you know, as I think as the whole panel has said, it's time to think about not just replacing what is empty with something new. It's really about thinking, what do we need now and how do we form that, or how do we adjust it so we can give it that. And artists are just part of your community. They're not separate species or beings. They're part of your community. You know, they're your neighbor. They're the person that you might go to church with or whatever it is. So it's really about just giving them a part in the total picture and a total part of the economy, just like anyone else. And so look around who's got what, encourage people to use spaces. And as everybody is saying, how we have flexibility with business rates and such, so that we can keep nimble and use spaces and not keep them empty, will actually just help the economy, not hurt it in that attempt to just make a bigger profit later.
Fantastic, Sherry. Well, look, we're running out of time. Despite our manful attempts to try and answer all the questions, more have come up as we've been answering them. So I hope we managed to touch on a few others as well. I'm going to whiz around the panel, and you've got about 15 seconds each, and then I'm going to hand over to Catherine. Starting with you, Mary, do we have it within us to make the sort of changes we need to on the high street? Is it going to happen?
We do, but we need to be brave and think and work differently.
Thank you. Sherry?
Yes, it's happened before. It will happen again. Keep going.
Ed, do you think we've got it in us to do what we need to do?
100%, but I think that the point that Sherry just mentioned about being adaptive and nimble is critical to future success.
Faye, same question to you.
Yeah, I think now's the time. You know, we've got so many lessons learned, and now's the time to kind of kickstart activity again. Being appreciative of where we're at, but yeah, that sort of collaborative approach again.
And Jackie, the same question to you, just to finish off.
Act, adapt, collaborate. That's it.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for your questions, everyone. I hope we managed to touch on quite a few. So there were lots about residential that we didn't really get into, so I apologise for that. But hopefully we covered a lot of the bases that people are interested in. So thank you very much to all of you and to our panel. And I'll hand over to Catherine to see us out.
Thank you, Mark. Huge thanks to all of our panelists, and particularly to ShopAppy and Jackie for bringing this panel forward. I think it's been really, really interesting and great to hear from so many people watching, and apologies we didn't have time to get around all of that. But we are only halfway through the Real Estate Live Week. We have 12 more opportunities to talk about all of this, and it is all interrelated. At just in an hour's time, we will be going into a panel hosted by U Capital, who are redeveloping Kensington Olympia, and that's talking about the creative sector within specifically West London. But there's been a lot of talk about the importance of creativity coming forward in our high streets and communities. So I would encourage those of you that haven't already signed up for that to do so. And then later on this afternoon, we're looking at a new type of community in respect of what will garden communities need to look like. They've been in the press a lot, but moving forward, what will a new garden community look like? And that's in partnership with Homes England, with the South East Local Enterprise Partnership, and many, many others, Ebbs Fleet, who will be bringing that forward. So there's really a lot more to talk about this week, and it is about collaborating this week. So we would encourage you all to join us in our future sessions. Just go to the website, realestatelive.co.uk. So for this morning, thank you again to ShopAppy and the rest of our panel this morning. We look forward to seeing you shortly. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.